And I know this works because I've done it successfully once before in an area that was just absolutely covered with Bermudagrass. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Friday, November 24th here in South Georgia. And on today's video, we're gonna pull back this tarp, or finish pulling back this tarp that we've had on this plot here, show you the results so far, talk about what weeds and grasses we can kill with this method. We've been getting a lot of questions about that lately. And then we'll show you kind of our monthly maintenance that we do on these tarp plots. So we put a tarp on this plot about a month ago to try and take care of a pigweed issue that we have in this plot. And my original plan was to kind of slowly pull back the tarp, do a big reveal to show you the results so far. But as you can see here, the tarp's already about halfway off the plot. We were gone camping earlier this week, had a nice little storm roll through here. It blew it back a little bit. And here in a minute, we'll pull it back completely so we can see it a little better. So when we're using this tarping technique, we've got two main goals that we want to accomplish. One, we want to kill any existing weeds that are in the plot. Yes, we could go out there and hand pull those weeds. We could cultivate and rake out those weeds, but the tarp makes it really easy just by excluding the light hitting the plot there. We kill those weeds. And then the second goal is to reduce our weed seed bank, or the amount of weed seeds that we have in our soil. And the tarp does that by creating this perfect environment for seeds to germinate, a nice, moist, warm environment underneath the tarp. We get all those weed seeds to germinate, and then they die because there's no light. When we reduce the amount of weed seeds we have in our soil, it makes gardening a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and pull back the rest of this tarp, get my bricks back on the outside of the plot, and then we'll take a closer look at how good a job it's done so far. All right, so we got it pulled back all the way now, and as you can see here, it looks pretty clean with the exception of some corn stalks that are left out there, but we don't see any green weeds growing in this plot. Now we do have some yellow or white weeds and some red roots like we see on this pigweed right here. And so this is what the tarp has been doing by excluding the light, changing those leaves from green to yellow and then white. Now if I were to take this tarp off for good today, these yellow or white weeds might catch a second wind, just depending on how much warm weather we have left, and they might come back. But we're not going to do that. We're going to put the tarp back on here in a minute, and these things will eventually shrivel up and die. And to our point about reducing the weed seed bank, here we can see an ear of corn that was left out here that germinated. So this tells us we had a nice, moist, warm environment underneath that tarp to get everything in this soil germinated and then hopefully die. And then the other thing we see, which is something you're always going to get when you're doing this tarping technique, is a fire ant bed. So there are a lot of great upsides to this tarping process, but one of the downsides is the fire ants. But don't let the fire ants bother you too much. As soon as you get back growing in the plot, doing some light cultivation and stuff, those fire ants will move. So fire ants really liked undisturbed areas. We rarely have any issues with fire ants in any of our garden plots or raised beds because we're always scratching around in the soil just the first couple inches there. They don't like that disturbance, and so we only see fire ant beds on the kind of corners of our property that don't get a lot of foot traffic or traffic from me riding around in the buggy. The fire ants are congregating underneath this tarp because it's a nice undisturbed area, or has been a nice undisturbed area for the last month. As soon as we start, doing some light cultivation in this plot again, they'll move to somewhere where they're not going to have to worry about being disturbed. But anyways, back to the goals at hand here. So we know this tarping process works pretty well on pigweed, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it in this plot. But lately we've been getting a lot of questions about, will the tarping work on Bermudagrass, will it work on Nutgrass, and several other grasses out there. So we've got a decent amount of Bermuda grass mixed in with centipede grass on our 2 acres here. Not a ton of Bermuda grass in these pathways between the garden plots, but here's some right here, right on the edge of this plot. You can see some of it yellowed that was covered with a tarp, and then some nice green Bermuda grass right beside it. Now, if you've ever dealt with Bermuda grass, you know it can come back with a vengeance. You'll think you've gotten rid of it, and then all of a sudden it's back everywhere. And that's why it's very important, if you're using this tarping process to get rid of Bermuda grass, you've got to tie in some cultivation into the process as well. And I know this works because I've done it successfully once before in an area that was just absolutely covered with Bermuda grass. So several years ago, I was doing some consulting for a farm about 30-45 minutes from here that were trying to implement the same setup we have with all these little subplots. And the area where they were trying to implement this whole subplot, or as we call it, dream garden system, was formerly a Bermuda grass pasture. I can't remember if they had cows out there or goats out there, but it was just nice, dense, lush Bermuda grass. That was all that was out there, and it was really, really thick. And so what we had to do was use a tarp and till procedure, much like we're going to be doing right here, minus the tiller, since this is a no-till plot. So we blocked off where the garden plots were going to be, and we tilled them up really good several times, put a tarp on those plots, waited about a month, pulled back the tarps, tilled, watered, put the tarp back on for another month, and we had to do that or repeat that process, I want to say 3 or 4 times before we put a significant dent in the Bermuda grass. And so it does work. You've just got to accompany the tarping with some soil disturbance. You got to break up those Bermuda grass rhizomes that are down there in the soil. If you don't disturb those and break those up, as soon as you pull the tarp back, boom, your Bermuda grass is back. But if you accompany the tarping with some disturbance, you can get rid of it. And from my experiences on this property, you can battle nutgrass the same way. Got to have that cultivation mixed in there, almost kind of aggravate it to death. We used to have a lot of nutgrass around here, especially on those plots that are on the back half of the property. But last few years we don't see a lot of nutgrass. It's just because we had to stay on top of it. You got to be persistent with it. The tarping really helps, but mix in that cultivation as well to kind of aggravate it, and you will eventually put a dent in it. And then as far as other weeds and grasses go, we've had a lot of people ask about Johnson grass, and I can't speak to stuff that I don't have an issue with around here, but I will say this: I've yet to find a weed or grass that can't be controlled pretty well with this whole tarp and cultivation technique. So we've had a month of tarping here. Now it's time for the cultivation part before we put the tarp back on. And we're going to use the wheel hoe instead of the tiller, since this is one of our no-till plots. Now it's important to note here that you want to mimic the level or depth of cultivation that you're going to be using once you're done with the tarping process. I wouldn't want to use a wheel hoe to cultivate this during the tarping process and then come back in the spring with a tiller and get even deeper and stir up some of those weed seeds way down there. I either want to use a tiller now and a tiller then, or the wheel hoe now and the wheel hoe then. So I'm going to take this little cutting blade on the wheel hoe and lightly cultivate this plot. Then we'll talk about one more thing you need to do before you put your tarp back on. Alright, so we got that stirred up some there. It was a little bit of a rough go in some spots with all that debris we have left out there. But we were able to cut some of those old weed roots and hopefully bring some new weed seeds to the top there. So the last thing we want to do before we put the tarp back on is give it some H2O, keep that soil from getting too dry, keep our biology somewhat active, and also create that moist, warm environment so we can get those weed seeds to germinate. And that's why I pulled my tarp back to this side of the plot as opposed to any of those other 3 sides, because I like to put my sprinkler right here, have it spray out in that direction. That way I'm not loading this tarp down with water before I need to drag it back on the plot. Now it's getting pretty close to dark around here, so what I think I'll do is tonight I'll turn that sprinkler on and let it run for 3 or 4 hours, give this plot a good soaking, and then first thing in the morning I'll pull the tarp back on and kind of trap that moisture in the plot. So in late December, early 2024, we'll pull back the tarp, do the same thing, then put the tarp back on, and we may end up doing that one additional time, say late January, before we start getting this ready for spring planting. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. Don't forget to go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com, where you can find some of the fertilizers that we use in all of our garden plots around here. And if you want to learn more about this tarping process, specifically what kind of tarps you need to do this technique right here, watch this video when we put this tarp on the plot a month ago, and we'll answer a lot of those questions. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.